Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, "In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for the people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, 'Grant me justice against my opponent.' For a while he refused, but later he said to himself, 'Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Who is God? As an incoming student at Baylor University, I got this question in a presentation at freshman line camp. This week of camp had been designed with many fun activities to welcome students to campus that was used to foster friendships and create excitement about all of Baylor's traditions. Then, of course, because it is Baylor, we had a session where they wanted us to talk about God. So I sat in a room and I was asked, "Who is God?" Then we were given a few options identified as common images of God and asked which one we thought described God best. Is God a clockmaker? Did God create the world and set it in motion just to sit back and watch? Is God a loving father who is there to continuously watch over us and pick us up when we fall down? Is God a judge sitting on high, looking out and judging all of humanity? Different people picked different images and explained why, but I remember being very irritated by all of my choices and refusing to pick one. First, I was irritated that each image they gave me with the accompanying picture on a PowerPoint was male. Second, I was irritated that there was an attempt being made to put God into some neat and perfect box. Third, and what probably irritated me most, was that none of these images really fully described or accurately described who God is. Sure, there were some portions of the images given that were characteristic of God, but for the most part, they weren't great. In the small group session afterwards, my group's leader asked us what we all thought about the presentation. And I was very quick to voice my frustration. You see, 18-year-old Leigh was far less filtered than I am now. So I said something to the effect of, if I had to pick an image, I guess I would choose God as the loving parent, but I think even that image is lacking. God was described as loving, but at no point did anyone say God is love, nor did anyone say how this love is active and at work in the world. Nobody mentioned justice, God working in the world against the oppressive systems. Do I think God is a loving parent? Yes. But there's a lot more to any parent than just being there to pick me up and watch over me, which also I might add is an incredibly individualistic viewpoint to have. We shouldn't put God into a box. And I looked around at my group and everyone was kind of looking at me. And I realized, this was not the place to let that fly out. And they began to disagree with me, and they were adamant that the Bible described God as a loving father, continuously watching over them, fulfilling their every wish, need, and desire. The thing is, the Bible does give us images of God as a loving parent, but it also gives us so many more rich and complex images of God. Like in our parable today, God is at work amongst the least of these, ensuring justice. Jesus shares this parable with his disciples, and we read that it is about the need to pray continuously and not lose heart, which, while true, can mislead us. I have heard preachers of the prosperity gospel use this parable to encourage their listeners to just keep praying. If they pray without ceasing, God will grant them every wish and desire. God will give them, like God gave the widow, their due reward. Friends, I hope I'm not the first one to break this to you, but this is wrong. God is not the judge in this parable. God will not do whatever we want God to do if we just keep bothering God. I have heard other sermons based on the need to pray continuously and not lose heart, where the preacher assures the listener that the good news of this parable is that if we just keep praying, all of our prayers will be answered. God will answer your prayers in due time. Just keep at it. Just as the widow was granted justice, so will your prayers be answered. Again, this is wrong. And this is not the promise or the good news of this parable. Here's the thing about parables. They're most often used to shake things up a little bit, to throw off the audience and everything they thought they knew. So yes, this parable does tell us about God, but it doesn't give us some striking new imagery. Jesus assumes the goodness of God and God's loving justice in the world. But the parable is intended to make us think about who we are and what our responsibility to the world and people around us is. In typical Jesus fashion, he uses the least likely subject to undercut everything his listeners thought they knew, which is why I love this parable. And I think that it is very good news because a widow is the agent of God's love and justice. Imagine the widow with me. Each day she makes her way to court, determined to see the judge, determined for justice to be granted. She had no one left. Her spouse had died, leaving her with practically nothing because widows weren't allowed to inherit their husband's estate. But that wasn't going to stop her pursuit of justice. The judge didn't seem to care about her cause, didn't seem to think it was important. He had the responsibility to care for the widow, to care for the orphan, to ensure that the least of these were cared for, yet he didn't care. She was just a widow, after all. She had no social standing. She had no monetary value. The judge had no respect for God or neighbor, neglecting the two greatest commandments. And this was all blatantly obvious to the widow. But nevertheless, she persisted. Day in and day out, she went to court and argued her case. The widow reminds me of climate change activist Greta Thunberg. In August of 2018, at the age of 15, Greta began to gain recognition for spending her school days outside of the Swedish parliament calling for stronger action on global warming. Day in and day out, she would go to the Swedish parliament holding up her sign that said, "School strike for climate." Greta's just a kid. She has no social standing. And she has even said herself that it's difficult for her to get in front of groups of people and speak because she is on the autism spectrum. However, this does not stop her pursuit of justice for our earth. Soon, other students began to join her outside of the Parliament building. They organized a school climate strike movement, and Thunberg even addressed the 2018 United Nations Climate Change Conference. And most recently, she spoke at the 2019 United Nations Climate Action Summit in New York, which gained her worldwide recognition. Thunberg has become known for her bluntness and her fiery spirit. And in her impassioned speech to world leaders, she said, "This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean, yet you all come to me for hope? How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet, I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction. And all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth? How dare you?" Imagine the widow, like Greta Thunberg, going to the judge with a similar fire. "I am suffering. I am dying, but all you do is sit here and refuse to grant justice. How dare you?" The parable tells us that eventually the judge grew tired of the widow. She kept coming and bothering him, and out of sheer annoyance, he granted her justice. However, there's an alternate translation of what the judge says. Instead of him saying, "Because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming," he says, "I will grant her justice so that she may not finally come and slap me in the face." While I am not one to condone or promote physical violence, I love this image of the judge, the one who has all the power, who can do essentially whatever he wants with no regard to how it affects the people he has been tasked to care for, being scared that this woman, this widow, will finally come and slap him in the face. Talk about a strong woman with some fire in her. I imagine that she's coming to her wit's end, and we don't know how long she's been coming, but I can assume it's been quite some time. And she's growing tired. Maybe she's discouraged, but that doesn't stop her. She continues to hope and persist well enough that the judge is fearful of what she may do if he does not grant justice to her soon. African-American civil rights activist and writer Pauli Murray knew something of persistence. She's also one of the most important civil rights activists that nobody knows about. Murray grew up in Durham, North Carolina before moving to New York to attend Hunter College. She worked her way through having to stop her studies at various times to save up money, and eventually she did graduate. And in 1938, decided to apply to the all-white University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for graduate studies. Not unsurprisingly, she was denied admission. And with the support of the NAACP, her case gained her national recognition. She further involved herself in the civil rights movement when she was arrested in March of 1940 for refusing to sit in the back of a bus in Virginia, which was a full 15 years before Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery. In 1941, she enrolled at Howard University Law School. After graduating 3 years later, she decided to attend Harvard Law School to further her legal studies, but was again denied acceptance, this time on the basis of her gender. Still, she persisted, and she enrolled at the University of California School of Law, and she became a successful civil rights attorney arguing for civil rights and women's rights. Thurgood Marshall called a book she wrote on state laws and race the Bible of the civil rights movement. She co-authored a gender discrimination brief with the Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And as if all of this was not enough, Murray left law to go to seminary, and she became the first African American woman ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church. Pauli Murray knew what it meant to persist and not lose hope. Throughout her life, she wrote many books, essays, poems, short stories. And in one poem, she captures the persistence of the widow in our parable and what it is to follow Jesus' call in this parable and to, like the widow, pursue justice. Hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers. Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a word in a tuneless ditty, a word whispered in the wind. A dream of 40 acres and a mule, a cabin of one's own, and a moment to rest. A name and place for one's children and children's children at last. Hope is a song in a weary throat. While our parable today is not about nailing down the exact correct image of God, it is as much about who God is and what God is doing as it is about us as Christ followers. Jesus describes God here as the one who will grant justice. God, who is love, is both persistent and just. The judge didn't care for the people he was supposed to, but yet God's love resists and persists through the oppressive systems. In systems where widows are denied justice, where black people are put in prison for not sitting at the back of the bus, where teenage girls are mocked for caring and fighting for our earth, God's love persists. Even when it's hard for us to see it, God's love is persisting. It persists in the resistors, the widows, the Pauli Murrays, the Greta Thunbergs, and in us. In them and each other, we see God, and we see and hear the call to prayerfully persist in the work of justice, even when the judge says no. Even when the systems and powers of this world do everything to discourage us from acting, from speaking out, even when we grow weary, we, like the widow, are called to persist. Be stubborn like the widow. Be passionate like Greta Thunberg. Be relentless like Pauli Murray. Justice will come. It may not come immediately like we want it to, but it will come. As the Reverend Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Our God is a God of love and justice and calls us to be people of love and justice. Pray continuously. Persist in resistance, in hope, in justice, in love. Do not lose heart. Amen.